Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often.
The aethal mutagen is a peculiar virus that was found in a world of a long-since-forgotten civilization.
Gaidar, the lead Ixian scientist, was explaining the origin of the ancient virus to Leothor, the assassin who would deploy the virus in their first test against humans, a large-scale deployment in a massive space station. The small Ixian adjusted his lab coat, his mismatched eyes, one silver, one blue, shining with excitement.
As for its effects, well, that you need to see for yourself.
Leothor maintained his stoic expression, though his inner thoughts raced. He had killed in countless ways before, with weapons, poisons, even his bare hands. Death was his trade, his art, yet something about Gaidar's tone made his scales tighten against his body, a primordial response he hadn't felt since his training days. They walked through the sprawling underground facility, their footsteps echoing against polished stone floors. The complex was a massive display of Ixian engineering, buried deep beneath their homeworld's crust where prying eyes could never reach. The curved walls housed countless containment chambers, each sealed with double-layered glass that couldn't be seen through, a safety feature, Leothor assumed, though he wondered if it was to protect those outside from what lurked within, or vice versa. The lighting was clinical and harsh, bouncing off the obsidian scales that covered both Ixians, though in markedly different patterns. Their species took great pride in these natural armored plates, virtually impenetrable, resistant to extreme temperatures, and with a subtle reflective pattern that shifted in the light, evolutionary perfection, as they often boasted to other species. Gaidar was short even for a scientist-caste member, barely reaching 4 feet. His hunched posture from years bent over microscopes made him appear even smaller beside Leothor, who stood a full 6 feet tall with broad shoulders encased in specialized combat armor. The assassin's equipment was already calibrated for his impending mission, filled with specialized compartments for weapons, survival gear, and now, apparently, a virus of ancient origin. Leothor's scales formed intricate patterns down his spine, marking him as a member of the warrior caste. His were particularly dark, almost absorbing light rather than reflecting it, a rare trait that had helped propel his rise through the ranks of the Ixian Special Operations Division.
How many species have you tested this on?
Leothor finally asked, breaking the silence as they passed chamber after chamber, each one emitting a soft blue glow from the containment fields.
37.
Gaidar replied without hesitation, his tail swishing with excitement.
Every species from the Galactic Council Registry that we could acquire specimens of. The results have been consistent in their inconsistency.
Meaning?
You will understand shortly.
Gaidar stopped in front of one of the dozens of glass doors that lined the corridor and placed his 5-fingered hand over the genetic scanner. The panel glowed green momentarily, acknowledging his clearance. Instantly, the opacity of the glass shifted, rendering it transparent. Leothor found himself staring at a group of 10 Eftarians huddled in the corner of a sterile white room. But these weren't the Eftarians he was accustomed to seeing in diplomatic functions or luxury establishments across the galaxy. The Eftarians were known throughout civilized space for their ethereal beauty, tall, willowy bipedals with luminescent skin that seemed to exude power from an inner light. Their features were typically delicate and perfectly symmetrical, with large, almond-shaped eyes in vibrant hues and long, flowing silver hair. Their grace and elegance were matched only by their insufferable arrogance. These specimens, however, had been transformed into something grotesque. Their usually perfect faces were now asymmetrical nightmares, masses of writhing. Weird tentacles emerged from where their smooth cheeks should have been. Their legendary silver hair had fallen out in clumps, replaced by coarse, wire-like protrusions that moved with seeming consciousness. Their once proud posture was now hunched, shambling, but the worst part was their eyes, still bright and aware, filled with the knowledge of what they had become.
"By the void,"
Leothor whispered, instinctively taking a step back.
"Is this what the virus does? Grows those things from the face?"
Gaidar's mismatched eyes gleamed.
"That's an incorrect assessment. The virus doesn't manifest identically across species. What's fascinating is that its effects don't appear random either."
He gestured towards the mutated Eftarians.
"Consider their species' primal cultural characteristic." "Their vanity,"
Leothor replied immediately. Every spacefaring civilization knew of the Eftarians' obsession with beauty and perfection. They looked down upon every other intelligent species, considering them crude approximations of their own divine form.
"Precisely,"
Gaidar nodded enthusiastically.
"The virus seems to target what each species values most about themselves. The Eftarians prided themselves on being the most beautiful bipedal species in the galaxy. Their entire social structure revolves around aesthetic perfection."
He tapped the glass with a claw.
"And this is what the virus did to them. Quite poetic, don't you think?"
Leothor stared at the creatures. A mixture of revulsion and fascination washed over him. One of the Eftarians noticed his gaze and moved to the glass, placing a 6-fingered hand against the barrier. Its once melodious voice emerged as a gargling plea in their native tongue, though the translation system didn't activate. Perhaps that was intentional.
"You're suggesting this virus has intelligence? That it knows what a species values and specifically targets that attribute?"
Leothor couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice.
"That's impossible. A virus is just genetic material in a protein shell. It can't possibly understand cultural values."
Gaidar's scales shifted in what passed for amusement among their kind.
"I once thought as you do, but after 37 species showing the same pattern of targeted mutation, the evidence suggests otherwise."
He began walking again, tail swishing with excitement.
"I have more to show you, more evidence."
They moved further down the corridor, the soft sound of the containment fields creating an eerie backdrop to their conversation. Gaidar continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite them being alone.
"Our research team hypothesizes that this was some form of punishment created by an ancient, highly advanced species against the long-forgotten Aethel homeworld. Perhaps the Aethels angered these beings, and this virus was their response, a way to humble them permanently." "This doesn't sound like science anymore,"
Leothor growled.
"It sounds like mythology." "The line between sufficiently advanced technology and mythology is often blurred,"
Gaidar replied, stopping before another cell.
"Sometimes the universe houses wonders and horrors beyond our comprehension."
Leothor found himself growing increasingly uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. He had faced death countless times, had inflicted it upon others without hesitation, but something about this virus felt wrong on a fundamental level.
"Is there a cure?"
he asked suddenly, the question surprising even himself. Gaidar laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the corridor.
"A cure against a virus created by ancients whose technology was millennia beyond our own? Perhaps there was one, but nothing the current species of the Galactic Council could recreate."
His voice hardened.
"The only cure is not getting exposed."
Cold dread washed through Leothor's body.
"What happens to them over time? The infected?"
Gaidar seemed indifferent to the assassin's growing discomfort.
"You're about to see that as well. this time in our own species."
He placed his hand on another biometric scanner, and the opacity of another cell shifted to transparency. Inside were Ixians, 5 of them, but so drastically altered that Leothor barely recognized them as his own species. Their proud obsidian scales, the natural armor that had protected their kind through millions of years of evolution, had transformed into something hideous. The hard, reflective plates had softened, turned into pinkish, fleshy structures that hung loosely from their bodies. Their natural protection was gone, leaving them vulnerable, exposed. Leothor felt his stomach lurch. The Ixian pride in their impenetrable scales was more than cultural. It was foundational to their identity as a species. They had evolved in a harsh world with powerful predators, and those scales had meant survival. Now, seeing members of his own kind stripped of that protection was profoundly disturbing.
"It corrupts what we value most about ourselves,"
he whispered, more a statement than a question.
"That appears to be the case,"
Gaidar confirmed, seemingly unmoved by the plight of his fellow Ixians.
"Fascinating, isn't it? A virus that punishes pride."
He gestured for Leothor to follow him to yet another cell.
"The creators of this virus possessed a twisted brilliance. They understood that physical destruction isn't always the most effective weapon. Sometimes destroying identity, what makes a species feel special, is far more devastating."
When they reached the next cell, Gaidar placed his hand on the scanner once more. The glass cleared to reveal a group of Grorians, typically massive, muscular beings with 2 arms and thick, leathery skin. They were renowned throughout the galaxy as warriors and laborers, their strength unmatched by any other sapient species. But these specimens were pitiful shadows of their normal selves. Their once powerful muscles had atrophied to the point where their skin hung loosely from their frames. Their proud posture had collapsed into a feeble hunch. They appeared frail, withered. Some could barely stand without assistance from their fellow prisoners.
"The strongest species in the galaxy,"
Gaidar said quietly.
"Now they struggle to lift their own weight. The virus is not kind to them."
Leothor felt a wave of genuine fear wash over him, an emotion he had thought trained out of his psyche long ago.
"Why would we want to release this on the humans? What purpose could it possibly serve?"
The question emerged before he could stop himself, a rare break in his professional detachment. Gaidar's mismatched eyes fixed on him.
"2 purposes. First, it's a weapons test. We need to observe how it affects humans specifically before considering wider deployment. Second, it's a scientific experiment. The ancients who created this virus are long gone, but the usefulness of their creation persists. We need to understand it fully." "And the space station was chosen because?" "Stellar Station 11 is isolated enough that containment is manageable if necessary, yet large enough, with its 10,000 inhabitants, to provide a statistically significant sample size."
Gaidar's voice was completely clinical now.
"Your mission parameters include deploying the virus through the station's air circulation system, then monitoring and documenting the progression of symptoms for the first month. After that, you'll extract tissue samples from various infection stages before returning home."
Leothor remained silent, processing this information. Throughout his career, he had never questioned assignments. His role was execution, not policy, yet he found himself deeply troubled by this mission.
"This data will help us determine if the virus is a viable option for clearing Earth for colonization,"
Gaidar continued, moving towards a heavily secured door at the end of the hallway.
"Humans are remarkably similar to several species we've already tested, so we have preliminary predictions, but direct observation is essential."
They reached a high-security laboratory where Gaidar retrieved a specialized containment case. The metallic briefcase was small, unassuming, Nothing about its appearance suggested it contained something capable of such horror.
"The delivery system is simple,"
Gaidar explained, handing the case to Leothor.
"Instructions are loaded on your neural link. The virus disperses rapidly through air-handling systems and has an infectious period of approximately 6 hours before coming inert in open environments. By then, it will have infected everyone on the station."
Leothor accepted the case, surprised by how heavy it felt in his hands. He had carried nuclear devices with less weight, both physically and metaphorically. Those were weapons he understood, predictable, controllable. This virus felt like something else entirely.
"You've never hesitated before?"
Gaidar observed, his heterochromatic eyes studying Leothor with scientific detachment.
"What troubles you about this mission?"
Leothor chose his words carefully. Expressing doubt could be interpreted as disloyalty, and disloyalty among the warrior caste was punishable by exile, or worse.
"This weapon is unpredictable. We understand radiation, explosives, even conventional biological agents. But this," he glanced down at the case, "this seems to operate outside the bounds of natural law."
Gaidar's scales rippled in what might have been amusement.
"The universe is vast, Leothor. Natural law extends far beyond what we currently comprehend. The Aethel virus simply operates according to principles we haven't yet grasped."
He placed a hand on the assassin's armored shoulder.
"Your transport leaves in 3 hours. The mission proceeds as planned."
It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. As they walked back through the facility towards the surface, Leothor couldn't shake the image of those transformed Ixians, their proud scales reduced to soft, vulnerable flesh. For the first time in his career, he wondered what might happen if a mission went wrong, not just for his targets, but for everyone.
"One last question,"
he said as they approached the elevator that would take him to the surface.
"What do humans value most about themselves? What will the virus target in them?"
Gaidar paused, considering.
"Based on our extensive study of their transmissions and cultural artifacts, humans appear to value their resilience, as they are persistence hunters. They take pride in many things, but they are so fragmented that they likely wouldn't even agree on what their best quality is." "It will be particularly interesting to see how the virus manifests in a species that can't even agree on its most defining trait. One worth being proud of."
The elevator doors slid open, and Leothor stepped inside, the case heavy in his grip. As the doors began to close, Gaidar added one final comment.
"Do be careful with the sample, Leothor. We wouldn't want you becoming an experiment yourself."
The doors sealed shut, leaving Leothor alone with his thoughts and a case containing what might be the most terrifying weapon he had ever handled. Throughout his career as an elite assassin, he had maintained professional detachment. Death was simply the outcome of a successfully completed mission. But as the elevator ascended towards the surface, he found himself hoping, for the first time, that his mission might somehow fail. The humans of Stellar Station 11 were about to face something beyond their comprehension, and if his own analysis of human nature was correct, their very tendency to adapt, the trait they perhaps valued the most, might become their undoing. Or perhaps, though Leothor dared not voice such thoughts, he might end up with totally new results this time with such an unusual species. 2 weeks had passed since an undetected breach in Stellar Station 11's security protocols. The massive space station, home to 10,000 human researchers engaged in various xenostudy initiatives, had been placed under strict quarantine after an outbreak of what the medical staff had labeled as an aggressive influenza strain. No ships were permitted to dock, and all scheduled visits from non-human diplomatic delegations had been postponed indefinitely. In one of the many shared living spaces of the station's residential section, 3 researchers sat around a fake wooden table in the communal kitchen. Various appliances made noise in the background, providing a comforting and familiar space to their conversation. Coffee mugs and half-eaten breakfast items were scattered across the table's surface. "This is the third week they've extended the quarantine," Jimmy Nguyen complained, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The cultural anthropologist looked pale, with dark circles under his eyes. "Do you know what this does to my research schedule? I had the Mardovian cultural exchange plan for months, and now they're talking about potentially cancelling all non-human visits until next quarter." Barbara Miller rolled her eyes as she sipped her tea. "Yeah, because your cultural documentation is clearly more important than preventing an interspecies pandemic." She scratched absently at her cheek, where a patch of eczema had flared up again, something she had been dealing with since childhood. "The last thing we need is to be known as the species that infected half the Galactic Council with the space flu." "I'm not saying lift the quarantine," Jimmy shot back defensively. "I'm just saying it's frustrating. The Mardovians specifically adjusted their migration cycle to accommodate this visit." Pablo Rivera wheeled himself into a more comfortable position at the table, the motorized wheelchair moving slowly. "I understand the isolation policy, but I can't help feeling useless sitting around waiting for this to pass." He gestured towards his legs, atrophied from a childhood spinal injury. "As if I needed another reminder of limitation, just when my xenoimmunology research was finally getting somewhere, too." Barbara's expression softened. "Your research into cross-species immunity adaptation is groundbreaking, Pablo. This is just a temporary setback." "Is it, though?" he countered, a bitter edge to his voice. "My whole life has been one temporary setback after another. You know what the Grorian ambassador asked me last month? If humans typically remove defective specimens from our population, as if I shouldn't exist." Jimmy winced. "The Grorians measure everything by physical capability. They don't understand nuance." "No, but they're not entirely wrong about how humanity operates," Barbara said, her voice dropping lower. "We're awful to each other, and even worse to other species. I genuinely worry about what happens when our technology catches up to some of the council races. We'll probably drive one alien species to extinction per week just because we can." She unconsciously scratched at her cheek again, the eczema patch reddening under her fingernails. Pablo noticed but said nothing. "That's a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Jimmy replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "We're not that bad." "Aren't we?" Barbara challenged. "Look at our history. Look at how we still treat each other. The only reason the council even accepted us was our potential, which I'm pretty sure is code for they're afraid we'll become dangerous if left unsupervised." Pablo nodded slowly. "The Iftarians certainly made that clear in the last summit. Looking at us like we're some sort of cosmic mistake." He gestured to his wheelchair. "Though in my case, maybe they have a point. 22nd century technology, and I'm still stuck in this chair because the robotic solution isn't cost-effective for my condition." "Don't say that," Barbara said sharply. "That's their prejudice talking, not reality." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Though I understand feeling inadequate. I've spent a fortune on dermatological treatments, and look at me. The skin condition just keeps getting worse. The Eftarian delegation couldn't even maintain eye contact during my presentation last month." Jimmy, who had been staring into his coffee, looked up. "At least you two have specific expertise. I'm just mediocre. My academic scores have always been just enough to keep me in the program, but never enough to stand out. Half the time, I think they only keep me on because they need a human face for the cultural exchange program." The three researchers fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The noise of the station's air system seemed to grow louder in the absence of conversation. "Some representatives of humanity we are," Pablo finally said with a hollow laugh. "One can't walk, one has skin issues, and one thinks he's not smart enough. The aliens must be so impressed." "Well, at least we're honest about our shortcomings," Barbara replied, attempting a smile. "That's more than I can say for some species." "To human inadequacy, then." Jimmy raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. "May we somehow not embarrass our entire species while trapped in this floating metal box." The others raised their mugs as well, unaware that their brief moment of camaraderie was being observed, recorded, and transmitted to a hidden vessel docked in the station's rarely used maintenance sector. 1 month after releasing the Aethel virus into Stellar Station 11's air circulation system, Leothor sat in the cockpit of his stealth ship, eyes fixed on the data displays surrounding him. His vessel had forcefully docked with the station at a blind spot in its sensor grid, a vulnerability he had identified during his initial infiltration. The risk of discovery was minimal. The ship's adaptive camouflage rendered it virtually invisible to both electronic detection and visual observation. What was far more risky was remaining here so long. His mission parameters had called for a quick extraction of biological samples and observational data. Instead, he found himself unable to tear away from the surveillance feeds, transfixed by what he was witnessing. The Ixian assassin's eyes widened as the latest data stream populated his screens. He leaned forward, adjusting the focus on one particular feed originating from the station's medical bay.
"That's impossible,"
he whispered to himself. On the screen was the human called Pablo, the researcher confined to a wheelchair that Leothor had observed during his reconnaissance. Except now, Pablo was standing. Not just standing, but walking confidently across the medical bay as a team of doctors and scientists followed him, their expressions filled with disbelief and excitement. Medical equipment was attached to Pablo's body, monitoring his vital signs and neural activity.
"The nervous tissue regeneration is unprecedented,"
one doctor was saying, checking a handheld diagnostic device.
"It's as if your spinal cord has completely rewired itself."
"The muscular regeneration is equally impossible," another added. "You should be experiencing severe atrophy after 15 years of limited mobility, yet your muscle density and neural response are approaching peak human optimal levels."
Pablo turned to face the medical team, his face showing a large amount of joy and confusion.
"So you're telling me that whatever this flu was, it fixed me? It specifically targeted my spinal injury and repaired it? This won't be temporary, right? I don't know what it would be like if I had to go back to the life from before."
The lead physician shook her head in bewilderment.
"We don't have enough data to draw conclusions yet, but there are no signs of regression. We've observed strange cellular activity in several patients since the outbreak began. Your case is the most dramatic, but not isolated."
Leothor's claws dug into the armrests of his pilot seat. This was wrong, completely wrong. The Aethel virus was designed to target and corrupt what a species valued most about itself. It was a punishment, a weapon. It did not heal, it did not improve. Yet here was undeniable evidence to the contrary. He switched feeds rapidly, accessing other surveillance nodes he had planted throughout the station. In the hydroponics lab, several researchers were excitedly examining plant specimens that showed unprecedented growth rates. In the engineering section, a team was testing new energy control protocols that had seemingly been written in the wall by someone in a moment of epiphany. Leothor switched back to one of the living quarters areas, focusing on the communal space where he had previously observed the 3 researchers. There they were again, Pablo, Barbara, and Jimmy, but all 3 were markedly changed from his last observation. Pablo was standing, even walking around the table with a natural gait that showed no evidence of his previous disability. Barbara's skin was clear and smooth, the eczema patches completely gone, and Jimmy was rapidly filling a whiteboard with complex equations, working through advanced theoretical calculations with apparent ease and confidence. "It doesn't make sense," Barbara was saying, touching her face in wonder. "The medical team says they've never seen a case of autoimmune dermatitis reverse itself like this. It's as if, or whatever this virus was, it identified the precise autoimmune response causing my condition and reprogrammed it."
"That's nothing,"
Pablo replied, doing a small dance step that would have been impossible for him a month prior.
"They're saying my spinal cord has regenerated tissue that human medicine hasn't figured out how to regrow yet. They're talking about writing up case studies, using my treatment regime as a prototype for future therapies."
Jimmy turned from the whiteboard, his eyes bright with excitement. I think I've identified the pattern. If my calculations are correct, whatever affected us is adapting itself to individual genetic expressions. This is beyond anything we can currently understand, that's for sure. Leothor sat back in his chair, stunned. This was beyond unexpected. It was inconceivable. In 37 previous species, the Aethel virus had manifested in consistent, predictable ways, always targeting and corrupting valued traits. Yet in humans, it seemed to be doing the opposite, identifying weaknesses and repairing them. With a sudden surge of urgency, Leothor activated his ship's secure communication array, inputting the encrypted channel that would connect him directly to Gaidar's laboratory. This development needed to be reported immediately. After several tense moments, Gaidar's face appeared on the screen, his heterochromatic eyes narrowing at the unexpected transmission.
"Your extraction should have been completed days ago,"
the scientist said by way of greeting.
"Explain your delay."
"There's been a complication,"
Leothor replied, struggling to find the right words.
"The virus isn't behaving as expected."
Gaidar's scales shifted slightly, a sign of interest.
"Elaborate." "It's not degrading the humans. It's improving them."
A long silence followed, broken only by the soft beeping of monitoring equipment in Gaidar's laboratory. Finally, the scientist spoke, his voice carefully controlled.
"That's not possible. You must be misinterpreting the data." "I'm observing it directly,"
Leothor insisted, transferring some of the surveillance footage to Gaidar's terminal.
"A human who couldn't walk is now walking. Another with a skin condition now has perfect skin. A third, who struggled with complex calculations, is solving advanced theoretical problems with ease."
Gaidar's eyes widened as he reviewed the incoming data.
"This cannot be correct. The virus targets what a species values most about itself and corrupts it. It's a punishment mechanism, not a therapeutic tool." "Yet, that's exactly what it's doing,"
Leothor countered.
"It's identifying individual weaknesses and correcting them."
Gaidar's tail moved in agitation.
"Have you collected biological samples? We need to analyze this immediately." "I have preliminary samples, yes, but the effect appears to be continuing to evolve. Every day brings new reports of miraculous recoveries and unexpected breakthroughs."
The scientist was silent for a long moment, his analytical mind clearly racing through possibilities.
"Perhaps," he began slowly, "perhaps we misunderstood what humans value most about themselves." "Explain," Leothor prompted. "If the virus targets what a species values most, and in humans it's manifesting as improvement rather than degradation."
Gaidar's voice trailed off, then resumed with a new intensity.
"What if humans, unlike every other species we've encountered, don't value themselves at all? What if they see themselves as flawed and lack pride?"
Leothor considered this.
"That wouldn't be consistent with my observations. They seem acutely aware of their limitations, but some of them are proud beings, just like the other species are."
Gaidar mused.
"Fascinating, and problematic for our purposes."
The scientist's scales shifted again, this time in clear confusion.
"Has nothing negative happened to any of them? No adverse effects whatsoever?"
Leothor paused, reviewing his extensive surveillance data.
"There was one human male who complained about a reduction in the size of his... The translation was unclear, but he referred to a 12-inch pianist. That had apparently diminished somewhat. He seemed quite distressed, though I observed no visible physical changes." "A 12-inch pianist? That can't be correct. The translation must be flawed." "That was my assessment as well, but overall, no. There appears to be no significant adverse effects. Quite the opposite. The station's research productivity has increased by approximately 37% since the virus was released."
The scientist's frustration was palpable now.
This is unprecedented. A bioweapon that improves the target species instead of debilitating it. The High Command will not be pleased. There's another concern,
Leothor added.
The humans are collecting and analyzing samples of the virus. Given what it's doing to them, they're likely to try to weaponize it. Maybe not as a bioweapon like we did, but as a therapeutic tool. They're already talking about potential cures for previously untreatable conditions.
Gaidar hissed softly.
If they manage to understand the virus, they could infect themselves on purpose and use the virus as medical technology,
Leothor finished. The scientist's mismatched eyes narrowed.
Your orders are clear. Destroy all evidence of the virus. Eliminate any human who shows awareness of its true nature.
Leothor hesitated, an unusual sensation for an assassin trained to follow orders without question.
That would require terminating nearly everyone on the station. Sabotage of this level is not something I can do alone. Just can't be done. The effects are too widespread. The changes too obvious. They are alert.
Another long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken implications.
Return to base immediately, then,
Gaidar finally ordered.
Bring all samples and observational data. The High Command will need to reevaluate our approach to the human problem. The virus is not a good weapon against them.
Acknowledged, Leothor responded, though a part of him wondered if he could actually follow through with those orders. Something about what he had witnessed had shifted something fundamental in his understanding of the universe, and perhaps in his understanding of himself. As he prepared his ship for departure, disengaging from the station and activating the stealth drive, Leothor found himself hoping that the Ixian High Command would decide the Aethel virus was not an effective tool against enemy populations, not because it failed to work, but because it worked too well, just not in the way anyone had anticipated. As Stellar Station 11 receded in his view screen, Leothor wondered what would happen when the Ixian leadership realized that the ancient weapon they had hoped would clear Earth for colonization had instead potentially created a more formidable adversary than they had ever imagined. Perhaps, he thought with an unfamiliar sensation that might have been amusement, they would need to find another planet for their expansion plans after all.